Discussions in this show should not be construed as specific recommendations or investment advice. Always consult with your investment professional.
Oh my God. Are we live?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. Good morning. Oh my God.
I could explain how that happened,
Okay.
but
Okay. First of all, I'm sitting here clapping us down because I'm thinking
Yep.
I'm waiting for the music, and then I'm rolling my eyes waiting for you because it's taking forever. And then the next thing I know, I don't hear anything. I'm live. Good morning, everyone. I will do a proper introduction in a second after I launch over the glass at Lou for putting on Jeffrey Shank's tax liability disclaimer on the front of my show.
well, I have two audio sets open and I hit the wrong window.
And Lou's fired today.
Do you want to play the intro music?
No.
Help you reset it?
No.
Just
Good morning. Welcome
All
to
right.
your daily game face. I am Dr. Kim Lannon, aka apparently Jeff Shank, the money man. I don't have a producer that knows what the hell he's doing. This is getting worse.
Took
and
you a long time to
worse.
figure that out.
Well, no, actually, no.
Yeah.
I always know that you didn't know what you were doing, but I just play along.
Okay.
Wow. Well, if I said I was kidding, then I would take away the joke, and then I wouldn't have any good commentaries on the backside of people going, "Yeah, Lou, you're."
Jeez.
That was a rough opener.
I was here. I was on time. I had everything under control.
Clearly not.
Clearly not.
God,
Exactly right.
I don't run my business like that. Jeez. Sorry, everyone. It's Lou. We all know it's Lou.
Yeah.
It's okay. We were going to have a full therapy session today. Because
All that was me.
It wasn't me.
No, that's what I said. All that was me.
Yeah, that's why I said it's
this
all Lou,
opening was
because
me.
I'm just sitting
Yep.
here clapping my hands,
Yep.
counting us in, and then now everyone got to see the backside of when I'm just sitting here rolling my eyes waiting for you.
I just drive home and start again.
Oh my God, no, because no.
Yeah.
Well, that probably has to be one of the best openers of my entire podcast career. Thank you very much.
Yep. Mine too.
I'm dying. Okay, you made me sweat. Like I'm actually sweating.
All right.
Like, okay. And right before that happened, I said to you, because you were being obsessive about the way I was sitting and my mic and everything,
Yep.
you had to check it 4 times. And then I was like, oh, at the
Well,
same
the mic's working.
Oh, that's good. I'm glad the mic's working. But at the same time, I have a client literally just text me, why did I get married?
Okay.
As we go live, I'm looking at the phone going, she's asking me, this is like not a question that
She's
I can
asking
answer.
you?
Yeah, she goes, why
Okay.
did I get married? Not
Yeah.
me. She was asking about why did she get married? That was her
Oh, okay.
text.
That's what I was wondering.
So
Yes.
it was more of there's no response to that, obviously. It was more of like, I think she's just texting me as I have to put it out in the world.
Yep.
So yes, my client just texted me, why did I get married?
She's processing.
Right. There's no, that's a no response
Yeah.
thing. Like there are many texts that go and emails that are just, people just dump it out. And then I just go, because they're not really looking for an answer. They're
Yeah.
more being rhetorical.
Yep.
Anyway, well, this has been an entertaining start this morning. Good morning to everyone. Hopefully,
It's my goal and
God
entertaining
knows
start.
who's listening now.
Yeah.
So maybe Faith is listening, or Kristen's listening, or Kate's listening. Kate's usually listening and not paying attention in class. That kind of stuff. Sometimes Mary's here. So, but no one's here this morning. Kathy's not here. Nobody's here. So everyone missed the opener to that. So Lou, are you in a better mood this week than last week?
I was up until that opening.
Okay. Well, there's 5 minutes of my life gone.
Why are we scoring my moods, by the way?
Because when I come in here, well, first of all, people comment on them to me outside of the show.
Oh, my mood on the show and my mood in general are two different things.
But when I come in, when we're not live,
Yep.
Sometimes my show gets predicated on your mood.
That's
So I have to check with, are you in a good mood today? Because last week, it was notable that you were not in a good mood, both on air and off air.
I've been doing air for 30 years. I can change my mood for the air.
Last week was not so much.
Yeah.
No, last week was not so much. So anyway, are you in a good mood today?
Yes,
Okay, good. Better than last week?
I guess.
Good.
I didn't have as much a problem. I didn't know I had as much a problem last week as apparently I did.
Well, you just were moody.
Yeah.
You were just a little off last week. It
Okay.
was notable.
All right. I
Not
apologize.
noticeable. It was notable.
Right.
So Anyway,
Yep.
so did you have a lovely weekend?
I did actually. Yeah.
So I have to say that I went to New Hampshire over the weekend because we had that stretch of like beautiful. We've had a stretch of beautiful weather with no rain, and we're about to get rain. But the hiking, if for anybody in this lovely New England area is looking for leaves that are
Ooh.
almost changed completely and it's almost full on fall in short order, just take a trip 45 minutes north and you're full on fall. And yeah, the hiking was fantastic.
Yeah.
So for all the people out there that love hiking and such, it was lovely.
Mm-hmm.
It was. So it's that season. It's pumpkin spice season. And as you know,
Apple cider donuts.
Apple cider donuts is different than the pumpkin season. As Mary, remember last year, Mary, Faith, and we all had the discussion about pumpkin spice. Blech. I'm not a pumpkin spice person, but
Found a farm stand with apple cider donut whoopie pies.
Oh.
Yeah.
There's a heart attack waiting to happen. I had
sometimes you gotta.
My teeth just hurt listening to that, but it sounds amazing, right? Because I love the apple cider donuts that are nice and hot. So even though after I eat them, I feel like crap. So anyway, what are we talking about today?
I don't know.
Well, I think
we're just being in the moment.
I was just going to say, I think we should we're going to go back to talking about a little bit about being in the present, but also, I was going to talk a little bit about the recovery process for people, whether it's addiction or depression, anxiety, things like that, or relapses, or when people have flare-ups, right? And talking about that because it's come up. I have a couple clients that have family members that have had pretty significant people in their life do significant relapses within a short period of time of being sober. So I sort of want to walk through a little bit of a recap around this. We haven't done this in a while. I haven't done this in a while. Have I talked about this in a while? Right. So this is going to be more of like a that show, especially because we're coming into the holiday season and it gets harder for people. Even though it sounds weird that it's September 18th, right?
Yep.
September 18th. And it gets harder for people. And there's Kate. She's in anatomy. Oh, good. You should actually be paying attention to that. You should know your body parts. There's a good thing. But recovery. So there's a difference. So let's start there. People talk about recovery and versus sobriety. Now, when we're talking about addiction issues like substances or gambling or sex addiction, shopping or eating addictions, recovery has that base of like, there's like the abstinence from the thing that you're using, right? Versus sobriety. That's what sobriety is. Sobriety is actually taking the thing out of your life and then just not using it or not overindulging in it to a functional level where it's impacting your functioning. But when you're doing real recovery work, traditionally speaking, and in the contemporary times, except unless you're under the governing bodies of some of the things that happen in this state that they've come up with in the past few years to try to let people, get prescriptions for, they substitute the prescription for the drug or the whatever to make it easier, MAT, medical assisted treatment.
Right.
So treatment centers are very different than recovery centers. So all these things have changed a lot in the country, depending on the state you're in, but most of the time, sobriety is just basically like you're putting down the thing and the ism is still there because you're not treating the ism. When you have recovery, you're working on the underside of why the ism exists in the first place, because alcohol, drugs, eating, all those are the symptom of the problem, as I've said many times, or codependency in relationships, right? That's the ism, right? It's that part, or narcissism, what's underlying it. So when we talk about people who have anxiety, for instance, and it's remitted, it's gotten better, it's been managed, someone's doing their own self-help work, or they're going to groups, or they're going to therapy, or depression, or things like that. It's the same thing. You're either in recovery from it and you're not cured, but you're in recovery from it because you're working on the underside of it all the time, versus you're sort of white knuckling it and pulling through, which is what I consider, like that's a treatment center kind of relationship. You're not really working on anything. You're just substituting it for something else so that you can just kind of manage and not be functionally impaired. So people get really confused about all this stuff because there's so much now in the environment that I'm going to sneeze. Excuse me. There's so much now in the environment of acceptability that, well, the person's sober versus the person's in recovery. And so I think that I focus heavily with my client base on being in recovery. That does not mean that they're not using any kind of medications or naturopathy or doing something, but trying to be less is more in terms of those things, because we have a real increase, unfortunately, in the push of let's fix the problem with medicating it across the board. And so, and that's with all these things. So that's why I'm saying it's not just like drugs and alcohol, it's including anxiety and depression and bipolar illness, like throwing as many drugs at something as possible, as opposed to let's really work at what we can to get it under control and then see what we need or tweak it as we go. I'm seeing more and more people, because of the state of affairs within the context of our state and our actual state of Massachusetts, we have a governing body that's come into play right now in the past few years that actually has stepped in and really pushed treatment centers versus recovery centers. So like if you ever hear the ads on TV for Recovery Centers of America, or you hear, which is not endorsing them or anything, it's just, there's a difference between going to an actual recovery center. That's where the people go and they work in like rehabilitative services. They have group, they go to the meetings, they get foundational understanding of where their root of their problems exist, why they exist, how they exist. They provide a multifaceted treatment approach, like family and getting couples counseling, or kid and parent, or whatever it is, right? Depending on the person, treatment oriented towards like that person. Those are where I exist in the world, because that's much easier to work with people, because there's not a brain fog that comes over you when you have people that, unfortunately, I'm not going to mention what the governing body is, but they're permissibly saying like, yes, doctor shop. They're not saying it, but essentially they're giving the doctor shop thing, that like the primary care is giving stuff, and they've got a psychiatrist, and they've got this other person, that a pain manager. Like, so now we got 5 doctors all prescribing, and we've got narcotics, we've got benzos, we've got medications that are all addictive back on board, just replacing what was going on. And people, it's not a judgment on it, it's about that is a problem, in the fact that it's very difficult to work on the underside of why the person was using alcohol or using opiates or heroin or overeating, when we're prescribing the same exact things that are essentially synthesized, manufactured by man to give the same effect. And then you're trying to talk to the person. So if you're trying to talk to a drunk person or someone who's high on heroin, and they're not using that anymore, but they're essentially on the same stuff that's prescribed and has a doctor's sign off on it, how do you do therapy with that? How do you do good soul core work with that? It's very difficult. Doesn't mean it can't be done on some level, but the level of depth and the recovery process isn't quite the same. That doesn't mean that you can't use those things, but it's a matter of really understanding and educating yourself. So there's so many pieces to this, because it's about, are you a good advocate for yourself as a client, patient? Are you understanding what you're being given and what you're taking? Do you understand what actually the history of it is? To be, people usually are like, they don't care. They just want quick fix. Just give it to me and I'm fine because the doctor said it was okay. But I'm always of the mind to educate. And then the person has at least the knowledge to say, oh, I want to be on this versus I don't want to be on this. But a lot of times when people are coming straight out of like their ism, they just, if a doctor says, hey, you can take all these things, it's okay, they just don't question it. And that brings on a lot of long-term effects. What's going to happen to me if I'm only supposed to be on said medication for 3 months or 30 days or less, but here I'm in 5 years, and now I'm having gastrointestinal issues, or I'm having a thyroid issue, or I'm having a hormonal issue, and it brings a lot of other things that come with that. So, and so we go to like the eating things. Like if I have 15 clients in my practice right now that are all using anything on the spectrum of Ozempic, Wegovy, Zepbound, Saxenda, all the great. no problem. I think it's worthy. Now here's the problem. I've had a couple of clients who've reached their goal weight, and I told them, I said, we cannot just stop that.
Yep.
Because if you don't have all the behavioral strategies in place and you don't understand completely why you were in the place to emotionally eat and keep doing what you're doing and all those things, you are going to gain the weight right back. And sure enough, I've had people jump off the med, think I'm good. And then 3 weeks later, they're like, I've gained 8 pounds back.
Yeah.
Right. What are you doing? Because you aren't looking at those pieces. So this is why I'm saying it's across the board on lots of different things. It's about recovery versus sobriety. And that's when we talk about the eating thing, sobriety is just essentially picking a restricted, doing the dieting yo-yo thing versus no, get to the core of why are you an emotional eater? What happened growing up, or what happened to you in, some moment in your life that makes you feel, when you're bored, angry, lonely, tired, to go right to a food product and it be a comfort food, and understanding how that makes your brain want more. Same thing with alcohol, same thing with an opiate, like this, all those things. Now, going back to the typical traditional, like alcohol, drugs, all this stuff, people will say, well, but I feel depressed or have anxiety. There's nothing wrong. And within the world of recovery, there's nothing wrong if you need an antidepressant. Why? Now, here's my clinical view on it and understanding from my years of doing this. There's no reason, not one reason to not use that, because 1, you don't have to be on it forever. 2, it's not narcotic. 3, it's non-addictive. For the most part, most medications aren't. They do come with side effects, but they're not things that are going to be so mind and body altering that you're going to end up never being able to come off of these things. And you can still do the work, which we know research wise, it always bears out that when you're doing like cognitive behavioral therapy with someone that is also on an SSRI, a selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor, like Zoloft, Prozac, Celexa, Lexapro, Paxil, Wellbutrin, all those. If you're on that, it actually helps the person be feeling good enough to be able to understand, to really get past their mind clutter, to be able to understand it better. So the whole goal would be to take the medication slowly back down after we get to a point, so that then they can get rid of it because they have now the coping strategies, the behavioral strategies, all things, because they're doing the work. If they've made it into an office like mine to be able to do the work, a lot of people just go on medication and never do the work because it's easier just to be on the medication, but they sit with their shit, they're still sitting in it, and they just, well, if it's not getting better, faster, right? Then they just take more. So in those cases, that's where it's not recovery. That's sobriety, right? We're essentially being, I'm using those words for all those things, is you're white knuckling the problem. You're just getting through, as opposed to really getting understanding of it and really fully accepting where your piece in it is, because you can't go back and undo anything. But what you can do is you can have full acceptance of it, understand it, change where you can make changes, understand where you can't, and have a better level of coping strategy and tolerance for that. And when you actually talk to people that want to do that work, they're like, yes, I want to do that work. Even though it's hard, they'll do it, right? But many people are like, oh, that's painful. No one wants to look at the things, especially when it comes to like having to deal with, talking to, a spouse, a family member, a parent, someone that you feel has done you wrong, that is contributing to that. They just don't want to deal with that because they have to sit with them at the Thanksgiving table, right? That's why I always say the pandemic was great for people, because it was like an instant cure it was sobriety, but with a little recovery, because everyone got a break, right? So I think very important to understand that you have to know the difference between, are you in your sobriety from your issue of your ism, or your relationship issue, or your drug issue, or your food issue? Are you in recovery, or are you in sobriety? And there's different things to do for each of those things, but collectively across the board, understanding, do you have good awareness of why? What's the why? How are you dealing with it? Why are you dealing with it the way you are? What could you do different? Who can help you? And where do we go from here? And, most of the time people don't want to do any of those questions and work on that. And that's that's the journey. You want a lifelong journey where you don't shorten your life because of the things that you're choosing to do. I mean, chaos. I saw a picture yesterday of somebody's very chaotic room as a almost 20-year-old, and I thought, oh my God, it's such a highlight of what's going on internally in this person, that the internal is externally showing in their pigsty, right? So it's, and not to be offensive, it's just that's such a microcosm look at, if you see chaos and it's in a room contained, that's what internally that person is more likely going through. Whereas they might present on the outside like beautifully and have all the things and seems like it's, on, at least for the most part, looks okay. And then you see that it's an internal reflection of, well, of course, this is what's going on. And how do you manage it? You have to look at it. You have to deal with it. You actually have to clean it up, because like all my guys that I work with from, Vietnam and Iraq and Afghanistan war, for instance, that have PTSD, I make sure that I tell them, like, your house needs to be nice and clean. You need to have like the environment around you be structured and collected in, so that you're not feeling chaotic. Because I have a couple of guys that will tell me, and I'm saying men because predominantly I see these men, like one of my guys lives with a hoarding wife, and he has a real hard time. It flares up his PTSD because it's encroaching on him and it's too much. So when I go back to the example of the 20-year-old whose room looks like a bomb went off in it, and she has no apparent self-esteem and self-worth, that's a reflection of her own self-worth. It's the same. It's like, it's too chaotic. So if you're living in chaos and you feel like that, what do you think you're going to do? You're going to eat, you're going to drink, you're going to you're going to go down some ism road that's going to make it really hard for you to function. So it's like, okay, you're in full-blown ism because you're in chaos. And chaos with PTSD, for instance, just flares it up, makes a person much more hypervigilant, makes a person much more flashback or re-experiencing context all of the time, because they're on alert, because you can't, a clear space like this office, right? Clear. But if it's cluttered, then you don't know where to anticipate something coming from. Then you have to be on higher alert. Then you have to be on more mode, right?
Oh, see, that's interesting, because that's a big thing for me. It's amazing how much clutter affects me.
Yeah.
And that's a great explanation of why.
Yeah. So what
you can't control your environment.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, it feels like you can't control it, right? Because it's so encroaching, right? Yeah. There's too much. That's why I'm always like, when I see people, because occasionally I'll go into people's houses to do like, a hoarding situation, whatever. And hoarding doesn't have to be, like you see on hoarders. It's like the people that have like a knick-knack everywhere. Yeah. That kind of stuff. It's still too much. And so they're sitting in their anxiety. So I'll give the example of like lots of anxiety. You can't have your bed surrounded by bags of garbage and clothes, and then like stuffed under the bed, and then, and drinks and, your drink bottles and all your, and think, I'm going to feel great, and the room is dark. And you see this a lot, right? That's how people will like focus on to live. And you can't live like that thinking, well, you live like that, but you can't imagine that that's going to be healthy for you. And if you do think that that's healthy for you because it's easier to turn a blind eye to it and ignore it, all you're doing is ignoring what's going on internally to you. And that happens to so many people, whether it's food, drinking, drugging, sex, exercise, whatever it is. It's about like, what are you avoiding? So, there's something to be said for General, what's his name, about like, start your day by making your bed. It's like, clean your space, keep it so that you feel better inside, because that's what you have control over. But when I talk about sobriety, there's still lack of control. When you get into recovery of something, there's more control. And by control, it's self-empowerment, self-advocacy, knowing your own worth, knowing yourself better, having a good self-observance from outside in, and not just be inward all the time, kind of protecting, avoiding, defending, putting up the walls, making it look okay on the outside when in fact you're a shit show or a hot mess, to be frank.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. It's such a simple concept, but it affects me strongly. And I question myself because of it. It's like, even like there's a spice cabinet.
Yep.
in the house.
Oh God, the spice cabinet. That's
And
an
I
issue in
have
my house.
like salt and Himalayan salt and pepper grinders. And I always have to have them to the left of that shelf because I don't like having to rummage through it to find what I need. I
Right.
want to know where it is.
Right.
So I can just reach in and grab it. And I get made fun of it, and I even feel bad about it because, like I was joking with you about my OCD before.
Yes.
But it's having that little bit of control is important to me.
Well, and so just as a change of word, you feel like it's control, but it's having a sense of its structure.
Yeah.
It's having a sense of it's knowing. It's not unknown to you. So when you open up the cabinet, so I can relate to this because I lost my a while back on, I had rearranged a cabinet the way I wanted it because I live with a person who's not structured.
Doesn't need order.
Not in that way, right?
Yeah.
So, and I have a specific way. And I swear over years, I have put these things back in order, right? Over and over and over and over. And I've taken pictures and sent him pictures and said, can you just, and this isn't about like being OCD to the point where like all the cans are turned,
Right.
I don't, right. This is more about like, can you just put it in so that we don't have, it looks like Pigpen was in there, right? And go to the spice cabinet. So there's 3 levels, and their height. It makes sense to me because it's like, okay, all the smaller little spices go on this cabinet.
Yep.
The ones that are like higher, they go on this, and then everything else is up there, which is the more rare use stuff, the things that,
Right.
and they're depth cabinets, and they're like 17 feet above me, so I can't see them. So there's wasted space, and everything is in the front. Makes sense to me. No, we can't have this. No. So I think there was, I don't know, it was clearly not about that issue, but that became the issue, and I lost my mind because it was chaotic. I literally had done the cabinet, and maybe 3 hours later came back, and it looked like I'd never been there.
Yeah.
And I lost my mind. I thought I was going to lose my mind because I had just done it, and it made sense. And it wasn't like the first rodeo to this. So, and that's where it's hard because you have someone else coming in and encroaching in on what makes sense to you. So when you live with someone, here's that codependency or the relationship issues, which, this isn't about codependency, but when you live with someone who encroaches on your way of doing things and you encroach on their way of doing things, and it matters more to one of you than another, it becomes a problematic part for your relationship at times. A spice cabinet, right? A spice cabinet is like the most basic thing, but it turns into, it's a respect issue. It turns into, you didn't respect it. You didn't care. You don't love me, because you didn't see that the garlic powder doesn't go there.
Yeah. Help me out here.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, but at that basic kind of funny example it's just the example of how, I don't have PTSD. I don't have that OCD thing like that, but we all have a little bit of OCD. And so when we have that feeling of chaos, or that we just can't make sense of what was known and now it's unknown because now everything's moved around or things have changed, then it's a very big game changer for a person. It can ruin a person's whole day, which, by the way, if you stay present in the moment and you've done your work, then you try not to let it ruin your whole day because it's like so petty and so ridiculous. But it isn't at the end of the day for you or me because it's like, but I need to have that happen.
See, it seems silly. It's like, it's my unnecessary hard thing. It's like, It shouldn't take me 3 minutes to find the salt. I shouldn't have to take 20 things out of the cabinet to find the salt, for God's sake. It should be right there.
Mm-hmm.
That should be a task. It should be a second. It shouldn't take you 30. Where's the salt? And then you do a survey. Where's the salt?
Well, I think this is a very common, I don't think this is just a you and me issue, but it speaks to the whole thing about like, the feeling of, here's anxiety. It brings up people's anxiety or agitation. For some people, they get agitated by the fact that, I just put that down and where'd you put it? And then in my house, I call it when, because there's only so many people in my house, right? So when you can't go to the person and have them say, oh yeah, I did it, because they have no recollection because they don't pay attention. I always say it was the salt fairy. It was the pepper fairy. I have this fairy in my house. He or she is, I've never seen this fairy, but this fairy moves a lot of things. This fairy takes things. This fairy has a lot of power in my house. has a very poor memory, but nonetheless.
What is this about me? Because this is the thing in my life too, where I can take the big stuff and I just deal with it, right? And I'm fairly calm about it, but the salt's not where it's supposed to be. That's an issue.
Well, because it's really more, because it's not really about the salt at that point. It's about the bigger stuff. It's something else or multiple other accumulated things typically, to answer your question broadly enough, that it's typically not about the salt. Salt is then the symptom of the problem, right? It's, same like for me, it wasn't, I could say personally, it's like, it's never about like the cabinet being in disarray. It's now about, it's about the toilet seats are never down. It's about the fact that I've asked for this 17 times. It's about the fact that please don't put the forks right side up in the dishwasher because I keep slamming my fingernails down into them and bleeding,
Knives blade up in the drawer.
Exactly. Right. So it's not about the one thing. It's about at that point, a juncture comes where you become unhinged, at least internally, maybe outside, about the fact that it's the salt, but it really isn't the salt. It's the things, it's all the things that feel like you've been, when I talk to clients or even use the personal experience, it's like, where's the respect for what I need? Where's the feeling that I'm getting that, you actually care about what I like versus what you do? I think that's a big piece of it for most people.
Do you follow, have you ever seen Emily King on, I think Emily King is her name, on social media? And this is going to end up being sexist, but
awesome. I can't wait for this one.
She's a woman, and
she's a woman.
She's always doing these examples of what men like and how men should be treated and what their battle is.
Oh, I'm gonna have to look her up. Okay,
I'll send some of the stuff to you.
And so, is it gonna annoy me?
No, it's not at all. It's just interesting that a woman ends up doing this.
Oh, okay.
And
I'm interested in
she's just advocating for men all the time, and the differences, and it's like for men the big thing is just appreciation. Nothing. It's not gifts, it's not acts, it's not any of that stuff. It's just
so. And I think that I haven't heard her and I haven't seen it, but if what you're saying is what she says, I think that I would agree with, if we had to do a gender comparison and we didn't go into like what's your love language and do all that, if we just went through it, men typically are looking for appreciation, praise, attaboy, you're doing such a good job, because socially, I'm going to go into the psychological aspects, because socially, we still have this thing of norming boys and men into your worth is centered on like getting the attaboy and like being, like you're the top dog. You're like the,
I was getting to the point where this is the salt thing in a nutshell, because it's not even about praise. You don't want praise. It's just like you put the salt back where it's supposed to be. That shows you appreciate my position on it. That's
the respect.
Yeah.
So I'm using the word, she's using appreciation. I'm using the word that people in general, but I'm female, and for me, the salt would be, it's respect. It's appreciation for the fact that
I was worth that half a second just to put it back where it's supposed to be.
Right. Yeah. Did you have to put it into the entire back of the cabinet for me to have to go scrounging behind 30 bottles to find it?
Yeah.
Because that took work for you, right? As opposed to, why didn't you just put it back where it was, right? And so, yes. And, but I have tolerance for like when the cleaners come in to like do like my office or something, they don't know me. So they get free passes. So it doesn't bother me. Like if they put all my stuff back, I just always know that, even though I think that after all this time, they should know how it was, they never put it back the same way. They try, but and then what does it take me to? I've never gotten upset with the cleaners for doing that. But if, who does it, then I lose my mind. I'm like, you've been doing this for how long? And
I know, and I feel silly about it, but it's a thing.
But I understand it, because it feels right to people, like, and maybe listeners, it would be like, oh, it's so petty, but it's really not, because that's the thing. It's accumulated respect or appreciation, feeling appreciated. And I don't necessarily know if that's fully a male thing versus, a female thing, but I'd have to see Emily's things. But I can appreciate that. I think that men are much more like about, did you see the lawn? Did you know that I did? Like, it's like, yes, you good boy, not saying it derogatory, but it's like, that's what it's looking for. It's looking for that moment of, I see you, I hear you. So it goes back to the 4 S's for all people, is like, do you feel seen? Do you feel soothed? Do you feel safe and secure emotionally across the board? So that means, I see what you've done and I love what you've done. I am soothing you by making sure I validate that by putting the salt back. And then I'm making it safe environmentally for you emotionally and secure that you can be who you are in the environment and it will be respected, appreciated, loved, and met with commitment and kindness. That'd be awesome if we all had that, right? And then I'd be out of a job because the 4 S's don't always get met, and that starts in childhood. And so that's where a lot of addiction starts from, and the addiction behavior of needing to have your salt in the right space, or having your towels on the shelf, or not, leaving clothes on the floor, whatever it is. Your addiction brain goes into, it's a dopamine rush when things are all structured. It's a dopamine rush when things feel okay. So if we go back to the example of the cluttered room and living in the dark and piles of stuff around you and garbage and clothes and bags and all this stuff, your dopamine and your serotonin, your neurotransmitters for your pleasure and for your mood regulation get depleted. People think anxiety is the overproduction of the neurotransmitter that is for anxiety called GABA. It's not. It's depletion. It's always depletion. It's when it's running, you're on running low, and the lower it goes, the more anxious you get. The lower it goes, the more depressed you get. The lower it goes, the less you're able to mood regulate and do all those things. So when you're living in an environment where you don't even appreciate yourself, not you, I'm going to the other example now. You're not, you're a 20-year-old living in, your own squalor, essentially. You really can't move that along because that's what you're doing. You're just sitting in your shit. And I often tell people they have to sit in their shit to be able to be aware of what their shit is, to be able to move it. But then people will sit and then they'll avoid it. It's the blinders come down and go, I don't really see that. Nobody else. I'll just shut the door, literally, metaphorically and literally. I'll just shut the door and no one can see it. So it's okay because I'm going to present a different thing. And it's well,
this is where we get to the point of understanding your power over your own outcomes. Because when you were talking about the appreciation part of this, I was chastising myself in my mind because it's I shouldn't need that externally.
But in that you're doing what lots of people do.
Yeah.
You are saying, I shouldn't need that. There's nothing wrong with wanting, needing, and getting appreciation, respect, kindness, and love. There's nothing wrong with that.
Because it sounds like making a victim of yourself.
But they're
not supplying what I need. I'm a victim.
But that goes back to that. So that great example, that would go back to your childhood, that someone's basically saying that you have to totally self-soothe yourself, right? And we are supposed to be able to self-soothe, but we also have the right to get ourselves seen, soothed, safe, and secure from our environment. And that includes people in it. So we deserve to have appreciation, and we deserve to give appreciation to other people, right? If you're a giver and you don't get a lot, that's a deprived environment probably for you growing up that you didn't have, which we know, right? We know that you didn't have a lot of that. You were sort of given the free spirit and you'd wish that you'd had not that, right? So that's the deprivation environment of when you have a great example, because I think it goes to the example of the room that I was talking about. When you're permissively given carte blanche, no one's there to give you external validation to say good job, or I would say, for a person that has the hoarding or the clutter, it's no one was there to say, wow, keeping yourself, your body as a pillar, your room as a pillar, your life, if you have no one there to reinforce it, to say excellent job and that's how you live and that's a good thing and it keeps you healthy, then there's nothing there. And I think all too often there's lifestyles that get started very early in raising adults, right? As we've said, not raising children. When you have a child, when you're raising them to be an adult and you don't really pay attention to their room, you don't, and that's a very common thing, more than it used to be when we were growing up. You don't pay attention to what's going on upstairs. You don't pay attention to what's going on in their room. People who are it's their room, even though it's in your house. And now you've got you had a 10-year-old that was doing it. Now you got a 20-year-old that's doing it. you raised an adult that's chaotic, and
Yeah.
you didn't give them validation for. We reward authoritatively the tasks and expectations that we expected, and we praise that, appreciate you for doing exactly what you're supposed to do to make yourself your best person, which is, we want the person to be the best person. That doesn't mean you can't have some clutter here or there, but when you're struggling and you end up with, and most of the, we are not escaping and getting better as a country in terms of, I say our country just because of who I see, but I think socialized wise, we are not getting better at getting our mental health completely more in order in that way, because there's so much of the Gen Z environment, the millennial environment of like, there is no appreciation. There is no, it's like the art of the thank you note. There's no more more thank yous, no more respect shown in that way. It's just so it's expected that, like, anything goes.
Yep.
And unfortunately, I see a lot of the anything goes attitude in my office, and then that's usually the root of the problem. Is that, I have a parent that years ago looked at me and said, literally took her hand and went like, fix her. And I was like, well, I think it's really about let's talking to you. But, the mother would never sit in the room for that because, it was fix her. I'm like, no, we had to really just look at, for over the years, we had to really look at how to just be in the environment with a person who is more permissive and just is like, well, fix her.
Yeah.
And the person had to readjust how to live their life on life's terms, not on lack of expectation, lack of task requirement, lack of praise. So when you don't have an expectation, and here's this environment, and this is a lot when we talk about isms, low expectation,
Yep.
low task requirement, but high praise. Everything's great. Oh, you failed. Let's go get ice cream. Oh, your room's a hellhole. If you don't fix it, you can't go to that concert. They go to the concert anyway. Like,
Yep.
if you're doing that, I mean, and I see a lot of that created, some more extreme than others, but it's like, well, no, but you can't fix a 20-year-old problem at 20. You have to fix it when they were 5.
Yep.
Too late. So you're, keeping in mind when you're talking about sobriety and recovery and like, you're raising adults. You're not raising children. You're raising adults. So everything you're doing in early childhood is whatever. But people don't think like that. That's why I think parenting classes for all people in high school, like starting early, how to be an adult, not even a parent, but how to be an adult. What is adulting? Nobody really, home ec classes that I used to take never would. We learned how to sew, woodworking, cooking, things. But nobody told anyone like, hey, how do you have expectations for yourself? How do you have appreciation for yourself? How do you get it? How do you show respect? How do you get respect? There's no classes like that. So when I teach my college classes at the grad level and at the undergrad level, I introduce those concepts like when I do positive psychology class or when I do one of those classes. And people are always like, I wish I'd had this in high school, over and over again. But they don't do that. And I think it's a really good life skill for a lot of people because they're not getting it at home.
Yeah, that's the thing. Generationally, there's been a lack of
there's
parenting falling down. It's been diminishing generation by generation.
Right. And now I see more and more of the isms in people's just life, right? So we take people I see more problematic relationships now than ever before because people don't know how to relate. Now, partially that's social media and being disconnected in that way, even though it's very connecting, it's very disconnecting. But in general, if I look at it psychologically and we look at the clinical aspects, it's really about the fact that the home life is so disconnected. And what's, the opposite of addiction is connection. And I've said that to you before, and I use that in my class all the time, is that you have to be connected in. You have to have love, kindness, compassion, and authoritative environments, high task, high expectation that's reasonable, and good amount of like awesome job. And when it's not an awesome job, you're not a failure, but there's an expectation that you're not meeting, and that doesn't mean you're punished. So it's not a shame,
but an expectation.
Right. Yeah. But here we are, is that now I see relationally people struggle because God forbid they'd have to show someone appreciation, but they want it, or they don't feel like they can give it unless they're given it in a certain way. And it's like, well, yeah, I'm not going to respect you if you don't respect me. And so then it gets to the stalemate of, we get into entitlement and all these things of like, how dare you expect something of me? And then say you're going to take something away from me, or the thought of taking something away from me because I didn't produce. But you can't expect somebody to produce at 20 years old. Well, you can, but you can't at 20 years old be like, if you don't do something, I'm taking this away from you.
Yeah.
Because that person's going to throw a tantrum, which they do, and because there's no it's no medium of like the middle ground of like understanding, like there's consequences for behavior, there's consequences for, but yet the person will be depressed and anxious and overeating, and
because they get all the praise and they get all the love and they get all the respect just for being a kid. Not
for just existing,
existing, right?
For just being like the firstborn, or just being like, whatever it is. It's like, but that doesn't make you. It doesn't make you special.
Demand to get that stuff in return increases as you get older, and they don't have the skills to deal with that.
Right, and
you earn respect, you earn love, you earn
right, and so, which is always interesting because parents will say to me like, oh, my kid won't do it in my house. They won't do the things they're supposed to do, but they'll go to other people's houses and do it. And then they make an excuse. They're like, well, at least we train them well enough to know what to do in public. And I'm like, okay. I mean, it's like, no, the kid has trained you.
Yep.
That's the kid, and that's not always the case either, because I'm like, yeah, that behavior you're seeing at home also is happening out in public, but it's not to people you necessarily know. It might be more to strangers or, things like that. Because you can't knock it out of someone. They can't, I always say, if you're a swearer, constant like swear for every other word, which, I see people that do that as an example. There's no way that when they leave your space, they're going out in the world and not just doing the same thing. And
but there are certain stages
they'll
where
assure me
they
that they'll assure me that in their workplace they're not doing it, or they'll assure me like that they're not on the phone 24/7 when they're at their work because it gets them fired. But yet the person will get let go of their job. I know people that've gotten let go of their job, and it's like they don't know why. And I'm like, oh, I bet I know why, because consistently, the last 3 jobs in a row, I know exactly what you're doing. But it's always, then it goes to, it's them. It's never me. And that's the same thing about like the sobriety versus recovery. It's not me. It's them. It's you. It's that. It's this. It's never me.
It's ceding control over your outcomes.
Right.
And when you don't feel you have control over your outcomes, that's when you seek other things and find other ways and need to cope with that.
Exactly.
Because you feel everything is out of control.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
There's 2 things that humans hate: unknown and lack of control.
Yes.
And everything is based in
and they're
that.
almost always together.
Yeah.
Because
the unknown is lack of control.
Is right. And that's where anxiety sits.
Yeah.
People have anticipatory anxiety, and what they do with it, one of the coping strategies that's not healthy is, we'll just avoid it. And what do? When you avoid something, you find another thing to do in that moment, to distract you. And that could be, sometimes it's good things like, oh, I'll go for a run and it'll clear in my head. Okay, that's great. Or I'm going to go eat. I'm going to go sit. I'm going to go eat more. There's a strategy. I won't face it. I'll just go the other way. So, or I'll drink, or I'll drug, or I'll whatever it is, or a combination of those. I mean, I see more and more people having what we call the multiple addictions.
Yeah.
And so they stop one thing, but they have another. They stop another thing, they replace it with another. And that's the thing about the medical assisted treatment is that makes me cringe, because it's like, okay, the person stopped doing opiates, or the person stopped doing heroin, but then we put them back on a synthetic heroin because it's a prescription. It's like, okay. And so if people don't know what that is, it's like, you're doing an opiate, not a lot of people necessarily are doing heroin, but say you had a pill popping issue, with Percocet, Vicodin, Oxys, or whatever, for instance. Okay. Now you're not doing those because, you're not, but now your treaters have put you on methadone and Suboxone or something like that. Well, those medications have a purpose. They're actually supposed to help you manage not killing yourself with overdosing, but it's also supposed to be management on a short-term basis so that this is what they originally made for. Very short-term, very much about how to help people within 16 to 21 days be able to kind of wean down and get back to baseline so they could do it without anything. That doesn't even exist in the world right now because it's all about like high doses. They just go on them for years and years and years, and it's given the green light that that's okay. Which, okay, that's fine. So if we take that and no judgment, it's about, but are you educated on what that's going to do to your body? I mean, I have a client that's been on something for a very long time that's prescribed. That's a replacement for the stuff. And they have had a thyroid cancer as a result of the medication that they're on. That's MAT. And I knew this was coming, and I said it's because of that drug. And sure enough, the doctors that they're seeing have been like, this is all a result of the fact that you've been on this thing for 15 years, a gastrointestinal thing, teeth rot. I mean, because it's synthetic heroin that they're using. So it's like but no, it's always, well, no one told me. I told you.
Yeah.
But it was, it's like, oh, but the trade out was like, well, I can do it because I'm getting the prescription. And this is part of the problem. And it goes back to the whole thing of that permissive, indulgent environment of, well, if an authority figure says I can do it, then I'm okay. Yeah, but that's great, but that doesn't mean
I'm more cynical when you say that's the way they're originally designed. I say that's the way they're originally sold. They were designed for exactly what's happening now.
Well, if we want to go into the actual pharma debate, for sure, they were designed for long-term, like
pharma doesn't spend that kind of money for short-term.
Right, solutions. Exactly. And that's why they continue to make more and more of the MAT stuff because it is big money. And I get it. However, at the same time, my job is always educate on all the levels, not just, you can be on it, just know what it does. If you're off it, this is what, so that the person really knows, because not a lot of doctors are out there, honest to God, not a lot of doctors are out there saying like, you have to be mindful that when you're doing this, this is what happens. Or when you don't do it, this is what happens. They're just like, here you go. This will make it all better. No, it doesn't. It doesn't make it all better at all. It just is a temporary fix. It's a Band-Aid. It's another Band-Aid.
All right. Early on, I developed a question because you introduced what I thought was a new principle to me. And you a nice definition between recovery and sobriety. I thought that was a nice distinction, something I hadn't had before.
Well, thank you very much.
And at a couple points, it felt like you introduced that recovery treatment is possible without sobriety. Is that true?
So recovery treatment,
because the standard thought is sobriety comes first.
So the standard thought, right, for traditional stuff is that you get rid of the thing, and then you start working, right?
Right.
But I have found anecdotally that people get rid of the thing and then they don't do the work.
Right.
And so you can be working on recovery for sure, and being in recovery and working on it. This is my clinical opinion based on my anecdotal work and also on research. You can be in recovery when you're not using narcotics or anything that's addictive. Now, there'll be a camp that will be very controversially kickbacking on that for me, that will say you can do recovery work and be completely high. And I don't have that experience anecdotally in my practice of almost 30 years. So although there might be research that supports that, which there is, which is a whole different conversation about the bias research or where that's coming from or who funded that research. Okay.
There you go,
right. But so there's that. And I always look at, okay, who funded it and who did it? Because I want to know, because there's benefit for people having things on board. But then there's also research on the other side that specifically says that it's very difficult to do recovery work when you're using, a very high dose, say, of like Suboxone or methadone, because you're high, and you're not like a little bit high, you're a lot high. And so people will fight that and say, well, no, Dr. Lannon, I'm on Suboxone, right? I have clients that are on Suboxone, and they'll say, they're on double dose of what the standard is in the industry, but they're on double dose because they're allowed to do it. And they'll tell me that they're not high. I'm looking at your eyes and I know that look, and I know that you're, bouncing around my office in terms of like your thoughts and your body and your movements and everything. And I know at baseline you wouldn't be like that.
Yeah.
And we have those conversations, and I just say that's the difference, like how are you processing, and do you remember what you would process like without this? But there's such a fear now for the person because they've been on it so long to come off of it. By the way, it is a bitch to come off of that. People will say, medical doctors will tell their clients, it's just like a little flu for a day or two. No, it's not. No, it's not. It is a 7-day hell run for 99% of people. And it's very difficult to come off of that and not have something else to have you medically stabilized.
Yeah.
So people will try to do it on their own, and they're fine for the first 3 or 4 days. By the 4th day, usually people are, because it's starting to go out of the system, and it takes 7 days for that particular drug to leave your system in terms of getting clear enough to start like a blocker that has no addiction properties. That doesn't mean that it doesn't stay in you for another 3. It doesn't stay in you for another month because it's and then it goes on. Yeah. But day 4, 5, 6, 7, you're rocking and rolling, and I'm talking like full on withdrawal and not good, throwing up, sleeping, angry, because it's an opiate. It's synthetic heroin. So when people say methadone is great for you, Suboxone is great for you, Sublocade is great for you, it does what it's supposed to do to protect people from overdosing on a street drug, for sure. It has great merit for a lot of things. However, it's also a crutch, and to get off of it I have clients that have come off it that will tell me it was harder for me to come off of Suboxone or Sublocade than it was, or methadone, than it was for me to stop doing pills.
Yeah.
Because this goes to Big Pharma. They designed it to make it so that would happen, which is the whole history. If people don't know the history of heroin in Vietnam, you should go look it up, because that's where it stems from. And I could go into a whole story on that today, but there was a reason why it was designed to do what it does. There's a reason why Vietnam vets came back with the addiction to heroin.
Yep.
Because it was designed for a very specific purpose. And so the follow-up drugs have been designed for a very specific purpose. Now it's being touted as, it's MAT, medically assisted treatment. Yeah. That's great. However, there are some important educational moments that people have to know. I'm all good. You want to be on it? Like the client I was talking about that's been on it for, I think it's been about 20 years now, since almost its inception. She's tried to come off of it. I've lost track of how many times, because she really doesn't want to be on it because she's had thyroid cancer from it. And it's fairly, but I say to her, I said, you have to come to terms with the fact that you're fighting in the chronic fighting of it in your head. And the fact that, I always say there's no old heroin addicts. Yeah. Right. And she's in her 60s. There's no old heroin addicts. And you've been doing this since you were in your early 40s. Yep. There's, so so she's looking at mortality because she sees what it's doing to her body, but she can't let go of the crutch. So it's that, and we can say the same thing about food, and we can say the same thing about alcohol. We can say the same,
the stakes are lower.
They're very different.
Yeah.
I mean, stakes are always death, right? It's just a matter of like when. I always tell my clients, like, I'd rather you smoke cigarettes. Not that I'm ever saying you should smoke a cigarette, but I say I'd rather you smoke cigarettes than vape. Yep. Vape is a faster death. At least when you have emphysema and you're older, that's a terrible death. And if you've never seen it, or you've never seen people go through it, but vaping, that's, that's TikTok, like black lung and all the other things. I mean, it's just, but it goes back to the original thing is, what are we not doing to look at the underside of why do the thing? Why do the drug? Why are we doing what we're doing? And unfortunately, because
that's too big a battle.
Well, yes.
Dealing with doing it is too big a battle to take on the deeper battle.
And I think it's important for people to realize that food, which we've talked about, right? I've talked about. So food and all these big pharma drugs, they all have chemical properties in them to make you not want to let them go.
Right.
So it makes the the chemical compounds that are in the foods, they're in the things that you're eating, ingesting, and putting in you at all times. You have to be a good consumer to know, is this making me do it more, want more, which is going to make you not want to look at, well, I don't care that I had a whole thing of Pringles and it has a chemical in it that makes me want to eat more. True story.
Yeah.
Right. So I never touch Pringles. You know why? Because I know I mean, you have one Pringle, there goes the can.
Yep.
Why? It's not because they're amazing. It's because there's a chemical in them that makes them taste amazing. So you can't just eat one, just like Doritos.
Right.
But if you go overseas, which I had that whole show on, they don't put those chemicals in. So it's not like that. And that's why you don't have the same kind of rates of addiction to food and things like that overseas, because they don't have the chemicals. They make them for us over here because bigger money. So it's a psychological thing. It's a money thing it's microcosm and macrocosm of the whole environmental thing. It's parenting, it's socialized, it's like all these things. But at the end of the day, sobriety, I want to go back and answer your question quick, is that can you be in recovery and still have stuff on board? Yes, you can be doing recovery work, but it's usually you have, like, if you're on like a mood stabilizer that's
Right.
non-addictive. I prefer you to be on stuff that's non-addictive, because then we're not trying to talk about our life issues while we're sailing through the clouds.
It's going to take all of your strength to effectively recover. It's going to take all your faculties.
Right. And people don't
Yeah.
usually want to commit to that.
Yeah.
Usually.
Yeah.
I try to help my clients do that, but we'll see. But anyway, okay. So love the way a show started today. Thank you everybody for, if you saw it. Wow, I was sitting there clapping and I'm rolling my eyes waiting
I'm
for
going to
Liz.
nail the out.
And you're nailing the hour.
No, it's not going to nail the out. It's going to be perfect.
Oh, you're going to nail the out. And
Yeah.
so, is it legal addiction? Oh, I just was going to answer that question. Yes, it is legal addiction. And it is a lengthy recovery. Yes. So to answer those questions, yes, that's the perfect way to say it. It's legalized addiction. Perfect. Well, you guys have a fantastic week. I will be back here next week with bells on.
See you next week.
Bye.